everyone. Welcome to the MouthFist podcast, to episode 1, which is, well, really our second episode since Ryan managed to save episode 0, which was our first episode. But anyway, I'm Steve Saunders, and...
I'm Ryan Speck. Again. Yes. Every time I'm going to be Ryan Speck and he's going to be Steve Saunders.
We might do an episode where I'm Ryan Speck and he's Steve Saunders, or perhaps I could be Manuel Noriega and you could be...
Nancy Reagan.
It'll
be a awesome love affair for the ages.
I could see a beautiful hentai porn spawning from this. Well, Ryan, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
RyanSpeck.com. See all the various shit. I'm a writer. Wrote a novel. Nobody cares. Steve, how about you?
Well, I'm a writer and editor. I make most of my awesome writing money at editing, which means not many people know who I am. I've written various comics and have been involved in numerous projects, most of them that have been put on ice. They don't ever quite fail. I'm a blogger, which is another way of saying I just post a lot somewhere else than my Facebook, which is Diary of a Grog Nerd, which can be found at grognerd.blogspot.com, or you can just simply find out everything that I'm doing when I decide to update it at mediagauntlet.com/sgsaunders. We'll have links in our show notes. How's that sound?
Yeah, more work for me. Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome, Ryan. You're welcome. So yeah, what do you want to talk about?
Well, what have we been up to in the past week since the first abortion podcast?
Well, since the nearly aborted episode 0, I have attended and worked at GotaCon 2012, which is a local gaming convention. I think they got about 1,500 people this year, put on by my friend Carson Upton and Evan Hatch, and they do an awesome job of bringing a convention. I was on a couple of panels, a writer's panel and a game master panel. That's Game Master. I did suggest a gay master panel, but they didn't go for it. Which were these panels were, and there were a few other panels I wasn't involved with, so they're unimportant. And and they were all hosted by the very lovely Julia Sherrard, who does Geeky Pleasures. And it was a lot of fun. I had a great time. I also worked the style and print t-shirt booth where we print up t-shirts and stuff. So if you ever want a bootleg shirt, go ahead and drop me a line and we'll get it to you. It'll be like $25 to $30. We can just print it out for you. And it'll be awesome. You should see our not Warhammer, not Inquisitional Seal shirts that aren't official and for personal use only.
And not for public sale.
That's right. And I've done a few other things in the last week, like I watched the new Thing prequel. I rewatched In Bruges, one of my favorite movies. Oh, and I watched End of Days because,
Yeah, how was that? I have not seen that since the theater, so my mind has virtually erased it entirely. As it really only takes 6 months for anything to be erased from my mind, but this has been, what year was that? Like 1999?
Yeah, and by the way, folks, this is kind of like me saying, and then I saved 16 orphans while buck naked from a fire and 3 mules, and then I had a big, huge chainsaw juggling party with zombie hookers, and then a giant steaming pile of shit. Tell me more about this giant steaming pile of shit, Steve. So, but really, in comparison to the other 2 films I mentioned. But End of Days was not nearly as bad as the critics at the time gave it. It's kind of silly. Arnold Schwarzenegger cannot act.
He was not right for that part as the grizzled...
Well, it was written for Tom Cruise originally.
That still is not good casting.
Well, it's true, but regardless of what you say, Tom Cruise can act. I mean,
yeah. Wasn't it like grizzled cop or something?
Jericho Kane, I think is the character's name, which is hilarious. He's just called Jer throughout most of the film. He is a broken cop, ex-cop, who I didn't ever quite say what he does. We just assume he's a bodyguard with Kevin Pollak, who made his entire career based off impersonating William Shatner. Who I love Kevin Pollak, don't get me wrong, but that's how I always remember him. End of Days, basically, of course, the end of Days is coming. Gabriel Byrne is a Wall Street banker who is possessed by Satan. Yay, Satan. And basically what you also get a devil's advocate-like speech going on. Jericho Kane is a broken cop. His family was murdered, blah, blah, blah. And he dies at the end. Did I mention I have a spoiler?
There's going to be lots of spoilers, I'm sure. throughout.
That's true. By the way, folks, if you are worried about spoilers, just stop listening to us because we don't really care about your little spoiler. Grow a pair, okay? And, it's like, oh, I don't like the spoilers, but...
If we're spoiling a movie that is now, 13 years old?
That's true. I won't give spoilers for the Thing movie, but the thing about the Thing movie is you should know what happens.
You know what happens. If you saw the original Thing, then basically it's a prequel. It did not end well, obviously.
No, it didn't.
Let me guess. I haven't seen it, but I guess it ends with them chasing a dog across the tundra by helicopter or something?
In the credits, when the movie ends, if the ending is right before the credits on any film, it ends with the fate of Kate, the American scientist or paleontologist. It ends with her fate. Kate's fate, if you will, and whatever that may be. You can kind of guess what her fate may be to tie things in, and being in Antarctica in the remote stuff. But I still won't give away the specific details of her fate. But as for End of Days, I thought overall it was a fun movie. It had some cool moments. It could have been much better. It's still better than half the films coming out today, which are rubbish, or too shaky cam, or too shit.
I may or may not disagree with you depending upon the specific movie, but yeah.
When compared to, say, Outlander, End of Day sucks giant nads. When compared to, say, the first Ghost Rider film, it's awesome.
I would still probably give it to Ghost Rider over End of Days. I remember it being really boring. I thought it was better than people said at the time. I kind of gave it a better rating than the critics.
How about Dragonlance? It's better than Dragonlance.
Well, I couldn't finish Dragonlance, so I guess that's a given.
Trying to think what other... I haven't really seen any other terrible films lately. But End of Days, I'd say, by the way, just give it a rewatch. It's got... Robin Tunney in it. You might see her in The Mentalist now.
Yeah.
She hasn't really changed too much in appearance. She's still very cute. And she also looks like an ex-girlfriend of mine, I noticed, which is kind of weird. In Bruges, which if you haven't seen In Bruges, you should. Have you seen In Bruges, Ryan?
Yes, saw it in the theater. The movie is not for everyone. If you are not looking for a really downbeat, sort of like funny in a really kind of tragic black way, then
like Layer Cake, or what's another movie that's like really bleak and dark but funny? Seven. But In Bruges to me is a comedy. It's a hilarious comedy.
Yeah. It was a guy who was mainly known as a playwright, and his plays were apparently really bleak and strange, like exceptionally weird and kind of fucked up.
Or A Boy and His Dog is another example of a movie I found to be hilarious, which is utterly fucked up when you think about it. And it's an old movie, too. It's just totally messed up.
I mean, In Bruges I enjoyed, but I don't know how satisfying I necessarily felt it was, because, I mean, it's not a movie that I felt like I could rewatch a bunch of times, because, I don't know, the end isn't like...
I like the fact that he might live. I mean, it's a huge spoiler, sorry guys, but I do like the fact that he might live, that he may survive after being shot so many times. But it's the scene where he's in the park by the gazebo and is going to shoot himself, and is stopped from shooting himself and has the breakdown about accidentally killing the boy. I was an emotional. It went from being comical to being gut-wrenching to being, comical again. In Bruges really, it does it very well of being, comedy initially, when the word comedy, much like the word cynic, or even now the word irony, isn't what people think it means initially. And comedy initially meant basically a drama, the lack of a better term. So, and it's comedy in that sense. It's both funny and tragic. It's like a Greek comedy. I loved In Bruges. I've been to Bruges as well, by the way, which is a beautiful city. Seeing that movie made me want to go there again, and my girlfriend said she wanted to go there as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. You don't see much of Belgium in films.
Belgium's awesome. Everyone makes fun of Belgium, but I love Belgium. Absolutely love Belgium. But it is true that most Europeans mock Belgium, especially Western Europeans. But it's a great country, great people. I lived very close to Belgium growing up, and I just absolutely love Belgium. So, great city if you ever can go. Bruges.
But probably not the greatest tourism movie for them. A deeply emotionally bleak film.
By the way, when people say Colin Farrell's a bad actor, I just hit them.
He's an excellent actor. It's just
I just punch them in the face. So I'm just like, whatever.
he's better with comedy than he is with drama sometimes. I think
Yeah.
he needs to be a bit dry in drama. But, I mean, I never saw Land or anything, but like a lot of the dramas he chooses are not like incredibly emotional dramas, but he plays comedy really well.
Right, and I would say like in Bruges, he basically plays Danny Dyer better than Danny Dyer plays himself. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Danny Dyer? No, he's like a British actor. He usually plays kind of like drunk dudes, and like he was in Severance. I don't know if you ever saw Severance.
Yeah, I saw Severance, barely remember it. Yeah, it was kind of a shrug. It was okay.
He was in The Trench, which I've seen all. He was in Mean Machine. He was in Severance, Outlaw, The Football Factory. I've seen all those movies, and I like Danny Dyer. Don't get me wrong.
I probably recognize him if I saw it.
What I was going to say is Colin Farrell plays his kind of like what the typical Danny Dyer character is very, very well in Bruges. One thing Danny Dyer does is Danny Dyer's Deadliest Men. Colin Farrell in Bruges, though, doing Danny Dyer better than Danny Dyer does himself, should have got an Oscar for that role, and is also awesome.
So your week was mainly those movies. My week mainly consisted of...
And a gaming convention.
Well, the gaming convention, yeah. We could probably do an episode just on the gaming convention, but...
That's true.
At least we're covering a lot of gaming this episode.
Mm-hmm, we are.
So, my week mainly consisted of watching movies I already had and buffing up on Hellraiser. When I was out last week with a friend, when my house got robbed several years back, they took a weird assortment of DVDs from my collection, but some of the ones they grabbed were my Hellraiser films. So saw a set of Hellraisers 3 through 8 for like $12. So I was like, for $12, I'll buy all those movies. I had most of them, and a lot of them were not good, but
I like 5.
I had the first 3, but I bought a set with 3 through 8, and well, I love 5. 5 is my favorite, but we'll get into that next week.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna have the Hellraiser episode. That's right. That's the next week. We're discussing the Hellraiser films and comic books that Boom is currently putting out.
An endless amount of research. We're going to have a discussion, I guess, because it started out with the Hellraiser comics and me just coincidentally also buying the movies. Mm-hmm. It will turn into undoubtedly a Hellraiser extravaganza where we will cover both the Hellraiser Classics Epic Comics, the new Hellraiser comics from Boom, the Hellraiser movies. Mm-hmm. I even read some of the like earlier script drafts. I read the Hellraiser Epic Comics Bible that was put together for potential writers.
Right.
So it's going to be a lot of stuff.
And I also heard Clive Barker had to go to the hospital. So although Clive Barker, he'll never hear this, I'm glad to hear you doing well, sir. And whether or not I like or dislike your stuff, it really depends on what it is. I'm very happy to know you're doing well. So
don't care much for your writing other than Cabal. Get well soon.
Oh, I like Weave World. That was good stuff. I mean, I actually like some of his stuff, but yeah, the Hellbound Heart and all the Hellraiser stuff, I'm like, the best thing come out of that was the Coil soundtrack, which I don't know if you've heard, but it's pretty good.
No, I don't think I ever did.
And it wasn't even used. It was just like, it was a Coil did a soundtrack for Hellraiser. It wasn't used. And then they released it as Hellraiser themes, the unused soundtrack of Hellraiser. Also, Hellraiser 5. Was it 5? The one with Craig Schiffer?
Yeah. It was Hellraiser Inferno, which was the 5th movie, yes.
I really like that movie.
It is my favorite of all the films. I mean, obviously, we'll definitely get into all the whys next week, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I keep like, no, Steve. We're talking about this.
We'll talk about it next week, Steve.
Okay, I want to talk about it now.
Bad.
Okay, sorry.
So that has been the past week in us. What we have been doing. Meanwhile,
we lead very boring lives, apparently. Well, there's actually one thing we also did this week, which is go over and read Thulu.
Yes, Thulu.
I don't know if there's a good segue to go into that, talking about that.
We actually sat down this week and read through all of Thulu, a Pathfinder adventure.
That's right. It's called Thulu. That's THULU ! And it is a 6-pack adventure from Postmortem Studios for the Pathfinder system. And Postmortem Studios is run by a pretty awesome guy in Britain, and they've got tons of stuff. You can get a lot of it through RPG Now in PDF format. And the copy for Thulu is Thulu has a ragged band of grizzled warriors trying to hold off the orc horde long enough for relief to arrive. Six-pack adventures are pick-up-and-play adventures. They have pre-generated characters, battle mats, tokens. All that just need to be printed out, or in the case of the print version, have the cover taken off to use as the mat and the tokens cut out. And that's the succinct version of the copy. And it's a Zulu film parody, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was interesting that he went with a parody of a film filled with puns of the actors' names and details from the movie. So I thought that was at very least interesting. It gave an entertaining premise.
Right. And
though obviously I am not much of a gamer anymore, I read more than I play, since the last time I played was probably 1999. So yeah, I'm a little behind on my game playing, but yeah, it seemed like a pretty well put together adventure. I like the idea of taking this little short few-page booklet and basically providing somebody with a ready-to-play adventure that, I mean, and this wasn't some incredibly detailed thing that is going to require a lot of game master work. Basically, you're talking about, like, protecting an outpost with a narrow bridge from orc invasion via wave after wave coming across the bridge. So basically, it's like a tower defense game in Pathfinder.
Yeah, exactly. It's, what was it? Rourke's Drift becomes Orc's Rift.
Yes.
And and being a history nerd and being a big fan of the film, I found that to be most excellent. Other details about this is that it's 26 pages of total, which comes down to about 22 usable pages. It's only $1.99 for the PDF version. It's incredibly pick up and play. Yeah. So if you are running Pathfinder or even D&D 3.5, D20, you can easily insert this in. And you could even, if you're running, like, say, Labyrinth Lord or actually any other game, hell, even Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you can pick this up and use it as an adventure. And it comes with 6 pre-generated characters. That's the whole 6-pack. NPCs. And everything's broken down into scenes and paragraphs. My only complaints about it are there's a couple very minor editing mistakes, usually doing with the indentation and spacing. The column layout, it's 2 columns, really easy to read. Really, really, really easy. So even if you just need an idea for an adventure for even Warhammer 40K Dark Heresy, you could throw this in, or a Traveler. You could.
Yeah, it's very adaptable.
Yeah, it's only $2.
And it's worth it definitely if you could get a print version of it, but it's worth it just for the mat and the tokens, I think, to just kind of throw something down and be able to play and have a good representation. I mean,
right. Exactly.
It's not anything major. It's not like some cityscape you'll reuse all the time, but you've got a bridge over a ravine and a wall, basically, to work with. So I guess if you ever need, like, to defend a castle, the mat can be reused. The ravine becomes a moat. You're defending invasion.
Right. And it's also has decent art.
Yeah.
The art is more than passable. In fact, it's quite good. And it's used sparingly. There's not much art in the book.
It's not really necessary. It's just to kind of give you character ideas. And it was nice that they did include, like, basically a full page for each character of background detail, how they feel about the particular scenario. Let's let somebody jump into, like, a 5th level character and already have a little background on who they are and what they're about to do a quick role-playing session without having to develop anything, roll characters, really think too much about their character concept.
Yeah, especially when you're old men like we are, when you're, like, doing, I run games still. I don't game nearly as much as I used to. But if I was running, like, a D&D 3.5 game, I would use this. I would have no shame. I'd probably modify it because I'm definitely one of those dudes who does not like using pre-gen adventures or
Though at least this one, it makes sense because it's very specific. All the characters are themselves parodies in a way, or at least analogs of characters from the movie Zulu. So, like, their background ties into that some. So you've got these characters that are kind of built specifically for the scenario. Because, I mean, if this scenario is really just we're going to play a single game, we're not going to have consistent characters, we're just going to sit down and throw together a quick game, and it's something that you can just read in probably a half hour and then run it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you can sit down, think about this for a half hour, and basically have your whole game planned out. You could probably read it. If somebody else can drive, you can read it on the car ride to the game.
Oh, I was going to say, like, I read through it, like, one time in the last week, and then right before we did the podcast, I read through it in about 15 minutes and have a very good grasp of it. So it's
I mean, it's not a plot-heavy, it's a battle-heavy, tactics-heavy scenario, but it's made to be played in a few hours by 6 players who don't have regular characters at moment's notice.
Exactly, and I love the orcs battle cry of Thulu, or Thulu, or whatever. I will say that the name was misleading. I thought it would be some kind of Cthulhu thing. When I saw it, I saw Thulu, I was like...
Yeah, I thought that too, and I mean, it's not spelled exactly the same. I mean, if you drop C, it's still missing the other H at the end, but I mean...
True.
But I mean, I saw that and I thought, oh, it must be some supernatural thing for Pathfinder. And then I start looking at it, and the first line you really read in the adventure says it's a 6-pack scenario for Pathfinder, which parodies the film Zulu. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess I'm going to have to go research the film Zulu now.
That's right, you haven't seen Zulu.
No, I haven't seen Zulu, but I mean, if you read the Wikipedia article, it gives you enough interesting information about the film that, first of all, you see all the puns and you see how the parody works, but also it kind of gives you an idea of how the adventure might run, which actually it's kind of nice to have something based off of something else, but more obscure. Obviously, not many people have seen a 1960s, like, British imperialism in Africa movie. Mm-hmm. That's not a huge draw for teens and 20-somethings these days, so the history buffs are going to love it, but people who are not familiar with the film Zulu, it's the type of thing where you can take off from a movie and have that background information, be able to draw from it without anybody noticing or realizing. And it's a good scenario. It's a very simplistic concept that could be perfectly brought over.
Well, you know, like the highest compliment I could give it is it reminds me of the old days of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Those kind of adventures, they were parodies. They were usually historical parodies, since Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is historic. It is a complete parody of historical Europe.
The old world is Europe.
And the empire is the Holy Roman Empire.
Like, at different time periods. So it's kind of this amalgam of different time periods in different countries.
Oh yeah, and the time period that they're portraying, the Holy Roman Empire was what we would call Germany today. Germany didn't exist as a nation until 1870. So the point is, like, yeah, that kind of what it's 1600s is about what the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is parodying.
Depending. I mean, it seems like they hit different marks for the different countries. Obviously, like, Bretonia feels like it's much more like Holy Grail,
1400s,
like King Arthur, and they kind of used a lot of the, like, Arthurian concepts in Bretonia, which is France. So, because they wanted to cover the chivalry aspect,
right? And that's where a lot of the King Arthur concepts come from, anyway. But it is France. But the Avalon in Warhammer is really early Britain, very early, like pre-Roman Britain, in many ways.
It has a lot of
Druids,
like, Celtic influence,
Well, and getting back to Thulu, it could easily be kit bashed into a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay adventure, one which Warhammer players would absolutely love. In fact, this is probably more suited to be a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay adventure than Pathfinder, although it's very suited for Pathfinder as well. Pathfinder is just D&D. I mean, I know someone will want to argue that and say Pathfinder is this or that, and it is its own beast now, as opposed to just being a continuation of D20, but really...
But at the same time, it still is an open license game, correct?
I believe so.
I mean, it's still under the open gaming license. It's still using the same way the statistics work. I mean, it's built its own thing, but I mean, it still is the extension of 3.5.
You can use the Pathfinder name for an open game license that was, because Pathfinder's based on the open game license. So
it therefore has to be kind of open itself. Isn't that an agreement within the license?
Correct.
Is that if you use the open gaming license, you also have to be open?
Yep. I believe so. Well, at least if it's not
proprietary parts of your... Yeah.
Of course, if we're totally wrong, someone tell us.
The mechanics of your game can be reused as part of the open gaming license. Like, it's certain aspects, but like things that you add specifically for your game, background information, fluff, all that stuff you retain. But
before we move on, I give this 8 fists out of 10.
An arbitrary measure.
That's my fisting. That's my fisting for this. What's your fisting, Ryan?
And I will give it, I say, yeah, I'll give it a 4 mouths out of 5.
4 mouths out of 5. So it's been fisted.
Give 4 mouths out of 5s, and you'll give it the fists. And
Yep. I may always make sure I do give a good fisting. And of course and mouthing, I suppose, from you.
Yeah, I give it plenty of mouth, and you give it lots of fist.
That's right. And that's where we get the mouth fist, which is great. We just came up with that, folks. I came up with the fist thing earlier, but
totally
Ryan...
arbitrary and incredibly stupid.
That's right. So, but it's very good, though. It's worth it. Look, it's $1.99. It's $2.
Oh, yeah.
Look in our show notes if you want a direct link. It's on RPG Now and Drive-Thru RPG.
If you're a Pathfinder player and you need an adventure, $2 is probably not a whole lot to spend for something to run totally off the cuff and quick. I mean, assuming you want an action-heavy adventure. I mean, if you're more like the storyteller who wants a game that's going to be heavily layered with a lot of dialogue and like character interaction, probably not for you, as this is going to be like holding off a lot of orcs. There's going to be some inter-group squabbling probably because there's different motivations. There's a cleric who's a pacifist who doesn't want to fight the orcs, and you have to decide whether to get involved or just heal. So there's like potential of like intergroup conflict, but at the same time, it's not a big grand adventure. So if you're wanting like something big or something that gives you a lot of room to play with the character concepts and have a lot of like dialogue and interaction, intrigue, if you're the type of gamer who's more like Vampire the Masquerade, a political gamer, then not for you. Though I don't know what you're doing playing Pathfinder anyway.
Well, I was going to say, if you're more of the Vampire the Masquerade political gamer, what are you doing listening to this?
Well, that is very true.
Well, I shouldn't say. I used to play Vampire. Actually, I like that game. I
hate Vampire. But part of that comes out of being in Atlanta when the game came out.
That's right.
I was there when it happened, and it was pretty lame. At least from my standpoint. And those people were super annoying. The guys that work for White Wolf, you will not meet a bigger bunch of pretentious turtleneck-wearing douchebags. Bohemian shitheads.
I met him years late. Like, the guys I've met from White Wolf in the past, which was probably, I think, a Penny Arcade Expo a few years back, they're really cool. But then they're like, they might be different people, or they might just be these people in their 40s, which people tend to be less douchey.
Like 1993, 94.
Yeah.
Like, well, actually, probably earlier than that, night, like 91 to 93. So everybody was a lot different back. Like,
well, I think we can break it down to people become less douchey as they get older, unless they go into politics, and they seem to become more douchey. So I think that, like, I don't know. I didn't know these guys are younger. I don't even know who you're talking about specifically.
Just some like writers for White Wolf,
right? Which, judging like what kind of like I remember the first players I had for Vampire in like 94, 95, and boy, like they were the people who would show up to the game session with fangs and think they were actually vampires. And
yeah, that's the other problem with White Wolf. It really does bring out a lot of the like fruitcakes.
Well, all games do, but
yeah, I mean that is a hallmark of role playing is the weird people tend to be drawn to it, but at the same time, even by like gaming standards, the weird people that wouldn't normally be into gaming, the people that would normally go into drama or go like watch goth bands or something, those people ended up being really into White Wolf games, probably because there was so little game to it.
Yeah.
I mean, you do a lot less rolling than you do like talking, and it would allow them to basically exercise all of their personal demons in the form of
exploring their character, etc. Yeah. I enjoyed the detail of the environment, and I actually like the Middle Ages version of it.
That was the one impressive thing, was they went really deep into each city and really like went over the top, and back in the day of like really describing the world, maybe an unnecessary amount, not like Kevin Simbita unnecessary. They didn't release like
1 million world books.
Well, yeah, like Topeka, Kansas. Like, Kevin Zambito would have done, like, every major city in America that people can name off the top of their head.
To be fair to Kevin, though, he didn't write all of that, and also they never really go.
He does edit and modify everything. Apparently, nobody has an original idea that doesn't get completely rewritten by Kevin Zambito.
I was going to say Bill Coffin and several other writers, Eric, I can never say his name right, Wujik, who died, unfortunately. That guy was awesome. And Bill Coffin, who released Septimus, by the way, which is a fantastic role-playing game. I highly recommend it. He wrote a lot of stuff, and there's all the big falling out, which is probably fodder for a whole other podcast. But and Kevin Zambito comes up with some stuff too, but a lot of the other writers, and in the whole that whole thing was... but it still wasn't as detailed. It didn't have the nuance that Vampire did. Vampire had a lot of nuance, which is what I liked about it.
Yeah.
It was
I mean, that's what you've got to have, because it's not like you're adding a lot of rules. I mean, what do people usually say? Like, these splat books, like, with that, it's usually like you get a bunch of new classes, you get a bunch of new, like, skills. You get all this additional crap to do to your character. In Vampire, you don't have that usually. There was occasionally like a couple new things to add in, but a lot of it was just like detail for the world, because it was just somewhere. I mean, what else were they going to put out? They couldn't put out new rules, so they had to put out something, and people liked buying it. Everybody wanted their own city to use, so sooner or later, everybody in that locale is going to buy the book to see what happened to their city, and people are just going to arbitrarily move from city to city to do something different. I mean, you piss off enough, like, of the top vampires in your city, you got to go somewhere else, right? So Off to Chicago we go.
So, and we should probably talk about White Wolf games at some point and explore that. That should be another episode theme. But the thing we were talking about last week that we're going to talk about, and we should probably talk about this time, this is, now that we've discussed Thulu, which is a great... adventure for D&D and Pathfinder players, and it is Pathfinder specific. Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Thoughts?
Yes.
We're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I mean, it ties in because Pathfinder, as we said, essentially Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, there's been a lot of back and forth, people like bitching and moaning. First of all, people didn't like 3rd edition when it came out because it wasn't 2nd edition AD&D.
Which is the best edition in my opinion.
3rd edition?
I 3.5 is my favorite iteration.
I don't like it. I mean, I was never much of a D&D player. I started on like the red box and never moved to advanced because I was like, no, that's enough. I mean, it's got all the rules I need and I don't play it anyway. I'm going to go play Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and fuck a bunch of this game.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That's fair. I loved AD&D. I got started with gaming with AD&D.
Probably just because I never played it very much to get an affinity for it, but it wasn't really my type of rules. I mean, I was much more interested in the world, and AD&D as a world, I mean, it's just very high fantasy, and that was not really my interest level. I liked the dark fantasy of Warhammer. Right. I mean, that was really the only fantasy game once I knew of Warhammer and started, I was more heavily involved in like Games Workshop related things through my friends out of the gate than I was like role playing. So they were all into like miniature gaming. So I start reading White Dwarf and like after what I'm like in 7th grade or something, and then along comes like No Gold in the Gray Mountains printed in White Dwarf, along with like the promise of Ignorant Armies and the first 4 books, Drakenfell's Ignorant Armies, Wolf Riders, and Zaragoz all coming out really soon. And it's like, well, why the fuck do I need to play D&D? I've got like this world that's already been built that's more interesting than anything else I'm going to come up with myself. So screw it. I can just play that if I want to play a game.
See, for me, I started a little bit younger, and because I suffer from having an incredibly good memory, I can actually tell you a very detailed rendering of how I got into gaming. And it was the summer of 1984. I was 8 years old. I was turning 9 that September. And my friend Logan, who was in my class, my parents wanted to go to Monaco, and I was going to go camping with him and his family because my parents wanted like an adult vacation, so they can go gambling and stuff. You know, it's pretty normal for Air Force families to do that. We were going to go to the North Sea, because I lived in Germany, by the way. And we were going to go to the North Sea with like Logan and his family. And Logan was like, have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons. He'd just gotten into, his older brother got him into it. And I said no. And we started playing in the car on the way there. We started talking about, I started reading through the books, and I was absolutely fascinated because I loved mythology and I loved the Middle Ages. And he's like, well, what kind of character do you want to play? And I said, I would like to play a ninja. Now, this is the year before Oriental Adventures came out. He goes, well, there's no rules for a ninja. I'm like, can we make it up? And can I be a Greek ninja? Because this is fantasy, and that would be amazing. Now, I know it seems strange that there was actually another kid on my reading level, because I was like college reading level by the time I was 5, but brag. But the point is, we played, I loved the dice, I loved everything about it. But since then, and I'm still the same kind of gamer. I don't game by the rules. Like I never have. I always figure out how to break them or use them or whatever. It was hilarious that I was on a game mastering panel because I'm just like, I just gave my 3 rules of game mastering, which is know your group, know your shit, and know your limitations. That's all you need to know, and I can go crazy. And I'm making lots of wild arm gestures as I'm saying this. But I fell in love with the concept of gaming, and I love the monster manuals and deities and demigods. And I came back and I asked my dad, I really, really want these books. And so he got a lot of extra weeding and stuff for me and other housework. And we used to buy them from the BX. And I got to, when I was like a year later, few years later, in 87, I went to England and I got to go to Games Workshop, like there's actually a store, like the Games Workshop store. I got into Warhammer and I fell in love with Warhammer. Absolute love. There's a special place in my heart for Dungeons and Dragons, and I didn't get the red box until I already had all the main AD&D books. And I couldn't get the kids my own age to play AD&D because it was too complicated. So they had to play like the red box D&D. So
yeah, which
was still fun, it's still entertaining.
Yeah, Redbox D&D wasn't my first game. My first game was actually the Marvel Superheroes Advanced set.
Oh, I love that game.
That was the reason I wasn't playing D&D, was because I was actually more interested in Marvel superheroes.
Oh, yeah.
I just started reading comics at the time. I mean, and if you wanted a great way to understand and get into Marvel comics, like as you're starting to read Marvel comics, also understand all the backstory, was read through the shit in the Marvel Superheroes Advanced set and the various booklets that came out for it, because that is so much background information. Right,
that and the Marvel Universe comics that came out. Was it the Marvel Universe?
Yeah, that was right around the same time too. You had all of the Marvel Universe, so I remember buying off the shelf the, what was it, Update 90 books or whatever, where they added all the new characters or whatever.
Yeah, you're a little bit younger than I am, aren't you?
Like a year.
Yeah.
But I mean, I didn't have friends that were into that sort of shit until I was in 6th grade, when I started with comics and gaming, because nobody was interested that I knew until that. And then our really only local, next city over, 10 miles away.
Well, I was going to say, I learned how to reading comic books. My dad was into them.
I went to the grand opening of our first comic shop within a 10-mile radius right after I started reading comics. So it was very timely. That was also where I bought the red box.
Yeah.
Was at that place. So yeah, D&D is something I was familiar with, but I just didn't play it as much because I was busy playing TSR's other stuff that wasn't D&D, because I was more into comics at the time. And then my friends were into Cthulhu, so I started playing Call of Cthulhu. So it's kind of bouncing around between all these different games. So it's most people have that D&D virginity that is broken. They play D&D for a while, then they move off to other games. Me, I started out with a different game and started bouncing back and forth, so I just never had the time for D&D.
And public confession, you probably did Cthulhu before I did. My first exposure to Cthulhu was in the first edition of Deities and Demigods, which one of my dad's friends had, that one, the really old one, which I have a copy of actually. I didn't really know much about Cthulhu or even care until someone said, well, you know that Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is basically Dungeons and Dragons meets Cthulhu. And I'm like, yeah, I read that in Dragon a couple times. I don't think I've ever played Call of Cthulhu. And by that point, I'd play Chill. I'd play all these other games that are horror games, but I never played Call of Cthulhu. It's just no one I knew played it.
That's so strange, since as far as horror games go, that game is so pervasive.
Oh, I know.
Especially since, from what I remember of my local game shop, it was you had a big section of GURPS, a big section of Palladium shit, a big section of D&D stuff, and a bunch of Call of Cthulhu stuff. And that was the majority of what was in the store.
I think it was, I'd already into all these different games. I just don't want to pick up a new game. And I wasn't interested in horror role-playing as much. And I was 13. I knew about Lovecraft and Cthulhu, but I wasn't really that interested in it. I was 13 or 14 when I finally flipped through a Call of Cthulhu book, and I'm all that's cool. I mean, anybody who knows me now thinks that I shit Cthulhu stuff. Like I'm basically, you know, like I'm working on Cthulhu comics, and I love it inside and out. That's because anything I get an interest in, I'm autistic about. So I probably do have autism. I ultra focus on something to the point of being annoying.
Yeah, I think it was 7th grade. Started with like 4th edition Cthulhu, but yeah.
Love that game.
But that's a complete aside yet again.
We'll have to have a Cthulhu episode. We got to set that. We got to have different episodes with themes. But back to D&D. Yeah.
Now that we've covered thoroughly the background of our personal experience being young, we were both obviously there when 3rd edition came around.
Right.
I didn't play D&D, so I didn't care, but I got to like hear people go crazy about it, hear people like question whether it was a good idea, and I myself didn't really care one way or the other. It was still D&D. Like I eventually like made some characters because my friend was going to run a game, and so I was like, well, I'm going to see if I can like break the game by making some really stupid characters. I'm going to make a like half-orc cleric.
Awesome.
That has such a low charisma he can't actually turn undead. And it was just like
goes well with a gnome paladin.
Yeah, that was my other character I made. I made a gnome I made a gnome barbarian actually.
Even better.
Like I was going to make a two-handed gnome barbarian, so I was just making absurd characters to try to break the game, but I tried out. I was obviously going through trying to make a character, and it was like it just didn't appeal to me as much because there was not that much. You make a character and you fill out a couple blanks on the sheet and you're done, and you don't feel like you made a character. A lot of the satisfaction of making characters sometimes is to come with something completely new that you've never accidentally rolled up before and say like, oh, I never would have thought of just making this off the top of my head. I mean, in Warhammer, you can roll up 400 different characters.
Right. The same goes for the Palladium role-playing game, which is still one of my favorite role-playing games. Love that
terrible system, but like it was fun to make characters or at least fill out character sheets because there's just like an endless amount of stuff to do. I mean, you see kids like playing and doing things that most adults consider to be work. They like to pretend to vacuum floors and stuff. It's the same thing with like
math.
You really enjoy filling out forms. It's like doing your taxes. Filling out stuff endlessly. I'm just filling it out just to do something. So part of me loved to make those characters that just make a bunch of stuff and you end up with this very full-bodied character that gives you an idea of who they are. But like I found that with D&D 3.0 and then 3.5 and then now Pathfinder, it's just like you end up with the same character every time. You make a fighter, you end up with this guy.
Whoa.
Much the same until you play it for a while, and then it adapts and branches off maybe as you go along. But everything felt... I mean, I guess that's a complaint that is a constant with D&D. Everything feels very cookie cutter.
And that's D&D. Like D20 is a totally... I mean, people say like, I hate D20. You're like, well, is that kind of like saying you hate rock and roll? I mean, it's like such a wide...
D20 is a framework.
Yeah.
D&D is like what the framework is built for, but you can modify it, put other shit in there. Maybe you like spycraft, but don't like... D&D. I mean, there's plenty of like D20 things that maybe modify it.
Right, exactly. There's all these different like, you know, like you mentioned spycraft, you know, you got fantasy craft, and then you have all these different D20 things that have come out. Like there's the Black Company setting, which is a totally Greek hit bashing of D&D rules, and there's no clerics. It's great. It's a great system. But the other thing too is 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, I just enjoyed it more. I liked it for the reasons why you say you don't like it, as opposed to 2nd edition, which 2nd edition D&D, I remember when that came out, I loved all the like Waterdeep box sets and, you know, like all the different box sets and stuff. They're great, but anytime I want to do something new with the game or whatever, they released like tons of new books.
No, yeah, that was their problem, was book glut. It was just too much shit all the time. I mean, when you have 5 new books a month, it's just too much to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing too is they kept updating the rules and everything. Then they came out 3rd edition and 3.5, and then we get to 4th edition, which I haven't even played yet. And it looks like it really does look like World of Warcraft.
I've never played it since I haven't played a game since 99, and I never did play the 3rd edition game that I made the characters for. So I haven't played D&D. I really cannot think of ever playing. I made a character, but we never finished a session because you end up sitting there at around a table. You end up making characters. You start talking, bullshitting. Nobody will sit down and listen. So you end up like maybe playing for 15 minutes and then the game falls apart. Did that with 2nd edition AD&D. Never played 3rd edition. And obviously I've read but never played 4th edition. So I probably have never actually played a game of D&D that I didn't run. And that has probably never been a game since like the rules cyclopedia.
Now, at this point, D&D fans who are listening to this will be like, then why the fuck are we listening to you?
There are plenty of historians who didn't fight in war.
See, good. Nice comeback. It's like, I could tell you all about the Nazis, but I don't have a working time machine.
Not in World War II, and you are not a Nazi. To the best of my knowledge, says the people who had the last episode revolve around Hitler.
That's exactly true. But the thing is, I read through 4th edition. A lot of people said they love it. And I think it's because it just proved the fact that you can take any rule system. Fuck, you could take Cinnabar or Cyborg Commando and make it work for you if you have a fun game and a fun game group. Because I remember when people were saying like Palladium was so rules broken, but I remember I had a really fucking good time with like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ninjas and Super Spies, Palladium,
the rules don't
Robotech.
make much sense. It's totally arbitrary. Stats don't line up to anything. You have stats based on these weird... You have using a D20 to roll the hit, and then you have these stats that go up to these weird numbers, and then you have percentage-based skills. It was just a mishmash and just kind of thrown together. It was because it was somebody's like homemade game that basically evolved over time.
Well, that's because unlike the people that did, like whether it was TSR or WotC, like those groups, or Steve Jackson Games with GURPS, or Steve Jackson, E. Livingston, and everybody else that's ever been involved with Warhammer, Kevin Siembita, and I'm not saying it's a slam on him whatsoever, he's like me, and he's a lot older than I am, so I'm probably like him in the sense that I'm just like, whatever, rules, whatever. So if I ran a game company and a game system, I would need someone like, say, you, Ryan, to basically come up with actual set rules where I'm just like, whatever, just make it up. And it doesn't matter, like, use your head. And that's what Palladium is. It's like, that's why Palladium never really bothered me. I'm like, oh, well, that doesn't work. We'll just figure something out. So,
yeah, I think also the problem is D&D, like, every few years they would say, okay, fuck all that, let's fix the rules and make them better, whereas Palladium has never really done that.
They could use a rules overhaul, even.
Yeah, they've never taken a point where they've said, okay, this whole Palladium system is a little jacked up, we've used it in too many things, and now it's just cobbled together, like SDC and MDC don't make any goddamn sense.
I still don't know why he doesn't go open source either. Like, why doesn't he do an open gaming license for Palladium products? I don't get it.
He's a little too attached to his own concept, I think. I think it's a matter of he's been in control of it so long, he doesn't like anybody else telling him what to do with his baby. I mean, because maybe he's got control issues. I mean, it sounds like it from the way that people have talked about working with him. They will write a system book for him for like riffs, or like, what was it, the Nightbane? Was that what it was called? Nightbane game? Yeah, I remember reading about basically how Siembita comes in, takes your finished product, says, yeah, I don't really like this, and then like rewrites 80% of it and uses like 20% of your ideas and then changes 80% of it to stuff he likes. I think everything he does, he feels like he has to make his mark on it. It has to be something that he personally wants to play. Right. And if it's something outside of that area, or in the gray area that other people might like it, but Kevin Siembita, that's not his level of interest, then he like tosses that out and redoes it.
Well, yeah, like I was going to say, I don't know about you, Ryan, but I've spent an inordinate amount. I'm really glad I'm a fast reader, because I've spent an inordinate amount of time reading through the RPG.net forums, which were like epic 190 million page posts about how much KS sucks and stuff like that. I was like, holy shit, but I've read it all, and I've heard all the thing about the Dead Rain problems and the thing with Bill Coffin and blah blah blah. But I don't know, man, like if Kevin Siembita said, I'm going to open source, open game license Palladium Fantasy, I would shit myself silly writing stuff. You know what I mean? So,
but 4th edition, like, personally, like, I haven't played it, but I mean, I think I ended up listening just to fill some time to the Penny Arcade 4th edition actual plays, and really enjoyed listening to those. So I actually ended up reading the books, and by far it's my favorite edition of D&D that's ever come out. I'm sure it would probably not be as much fun to play as other games, but it's definitely more interesting than other versions of D&D. I like the rules system more. I don't like the fact that it kind of seems to be nothing but dungeon crawling.
It's designed to appeal to MMO computer gamer types, so
to a certain degree, it brings those ideas in, but I thought they actually worked it really well. People complain. They're like, well, it's just like, wow. It's like, shut the fuck up. It's still D&D. And like no matter how much they change D&D, it's still the
Yep.
same goddamn game.
Well, be honest. Like, I'm honest about it. I just say I spent hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on D20 books. I'm not ready to give D20 up. I'm fine with it. No offense to 4th edition and those who play it. I'm just not into it.
Yeah, if people can be honest and just say like, it's not for me, or like, yeah, I don't feel like putting out any more money right now, as opposed to acting like whiny little bitches and being like, it's terrible, they've ruined D&D, and now people are already like all cagey and weird about 5th edition.
I might get 4th edition stuff for Dark Sun. Like, I'm a huge Dark Sun fan, and I also love Gamma World, which it's probably the next role playing game I'm picking up is the new Gamma World. So
people seem to like the new Gamma World, so
yeah,
I like the way that they kind of did it and have everybody kind of have these specific powers they can choose from and give you special abilities. It makes combat a little more varied than just like roll to hit, roll to hit, roll to hit. I mean, if you play a fighter, it's a goddamn boring game. D&D is some boring shit to play.
We'll have to do another, since we already mentioned like 6 other ideas for themed episodes. We should do a Warhammer one, because I can go off a whole tangent about 3rd edition Warhammer fantasy roleplay.
We can do 2 hours on Warhammer, 1 hour on Warhammer Fantasy, and 1 on Warhammer 40,000.
40K. Yeah.
Shit, we could probably do 20 minutes on Dark Future.
That's true. Oh man, I haven't heard that in a long time. Dark Future.
Sitting right next to me right now are 6 Dark Future novels.
Or Chainsaw Warrior, or like any, or even like the fighting fantasy, or anything like the British Steve Jackson or Ian Livingstone have been a part of.
But 4th edition, I thought it was a good game. It was just not for everybody, and like all games, it has a very specific usage. You don't use Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay to do like high fantasy, lots of magic. You don't use D&D to do everything. You don't use D&D 4th edition if you're going to do some incredibly complex character drama.
Well, it's too balanced for that. One of the things 3rd edition brought to the table that 4th edition really expanded upon was game balance. For instance, challenge ratings, which I think challenge ratings are good for like if you want to like jump them with a bunch of bugbears and jetpacks, sure. Or I guess chainsaw arm bugbears with jetpacks. But I don't believe in challenge ratings. I'm like, this is why my D&D groups hated me.
I've read that challenge ratings are actually kind of broken, that they do not work the way they're supposed to.
Well, I mean, not just that, but like, I'm a firm believer in the playgroup. There might be someone whose character is better than everyone else in the playgroup because they're just more experienced. But like, like if you go to this part of town or this part of the kingdom or whatever, you could get murdered right away. And that's just what's going to happen, and you'll die. Or it's like playing through the Gothic video games where you just wander off the path and a bunch of wolfmen kill you because they're not like, excuse me, sir, are you at least 4th to 5th level? No. Oh, well, never mind. We'll try to tear your heart when you're another level or 2. The verisimilitude aspect is just ruined. So,
As far as running games went, I was always much more beholden to story than...
Correct.
I would do whatever would fit the characters and be part of like the overarching story I wanted to tell. When you start thinking too heavily about building the appropriate level of challenges for people of these character levels, I mean, that's obviously a very like D&D centric idea.
It's a very video game, yeah.
Yeah, it's not something that's used in a whole hell of a lot of different situations. People aren't saying, yeah, for my Adventures of Baron Munchausen game, I need a challenge rating of 5. It's not something that's used everywhere. You want to make it challenging enough. I guess that makes sense that you don't want to beat people to death. It's very kind of structured for something that should be more or less a guideline, but I guess that's what they're doing with 5th edition D&D. It sounds like everything is optional. It sounds like it's going to be a system that's going to try to make a lot more sense, be a lot more simplistic, and at the same time have a bunch of stuff that can kind of come in and out of the game.
Right.
You're not going to pull out a section of rules and the whole thing's going to topple over.
Right. And the thing is, like 3.5 edition D&D and even 2nd edition, they're still enjoyable. And people still do make stuff for them. But, should there be a 5th edition? When did 4th edition come out? So it's been like 5 years. I think they're doing edition every 5 years. That's not so bad. I think it kind of actually boils down to the reason why people are flipping out about it is because they don't realize that the older you get, the shorter time has to pass. So 5 years ago isn't that long ago. But yes, 2008 and 2007 were 5 years ago. Like when the game comes out, so it'll be like 2008, because I'm assuming that the D&D 5th editions probably come out in 2013.
And you know who buys new D&D books? New gamers.
That's correct. And you know who's not buying D&D books? Young people.
Yeah.
So you got to make it appealing to them.
I don't know if they can anymore, really. I mean...
Well, it's thinking outside the box. It's like saying, do you like World of Warcraft? And do you like these video games like Skyrim? And they're like, yeah, I fucking love them. You're like, wouldn't it be great if like you could actually go through where no one says they got shot in the knee? Which, by the way, I saw a guy this last weekend dressed up as the guard with an arrow to the knee, which was awesome. You know, and you could actually talk to a guard, the one guard who does have an arrow in his knee, and he says something completely different. And then you might be his buddy, and you might join your group. And you're like, wow, I can't do that in a video game. And you don't have to write a complicated mod either. It's all in your imagination, yo. And they're like, and as corny as that sounds, Ryan, after talking to a couple of people like that this weekend, that shit works. They're like, wow, that's awesome.
Role-playing games used to fill a niche for a specific group of people that wanted to use their imagination and have these big adventures. Now their big adventures can be filled by video games as they're getting larger and larger and more pervasive in the culture. So the culture that needs the niche of RPGs is getting smaller and smaller. So, but also at the same time, like, I don't know if anything you do can necessarily appeal to them specifically to come in and try games. It's going to be one of those things like, are they the type of people who need games, and how are they going to find it? Are they going to find them? Or are they going to know people who are going to bring them in? It's really kind of it's like a pyramid scheme. You get other people into role playing, and
right.
then they get other people into role playing.
It's also become a niche thing. Like we already saw like probably the darkest days of role playing, which was probably the last few years, where everyone was saying internet piracy was killing role playing. I'm like, actually, I would hazard to say that internet piracy, so to speak, has actually helped encourage role playing, because it's like zero investment, and you read through it and you go, this is really cool, and then you give them money. By the way, I really liked on the Six-Pack game, I really like the piracy note. I don't know if you read that in the game.
Yes, I did.
That James wrote that, like, at least throw us a couple bucks our way, which I fully encourage. Not piracy, but if you do pirate the game and you got a couple extra bucks, throw dog a bone, man, give them something. Because these things, they don't come out of like Magic Free Land. They're actually made by people. But my point is about the role-playing games is I can see more interest. Like when I talk to my girlfriend's kids about role-playing games, they love video games. And then when we were their age, we didn't have video games, so we had to make it all up. But now they have video games. When you go like, wouldn't it be cool if you could do this and this, which you can't do in the video game? They're like, oh, that'd be great. That's how people get into role-playing games, because they want to exercise their imagination. And why can't you do both? I play both video games and role-playing game, like tabletop games. I love them. Like, why can't you just do them all? Like,
I think really it's just a matter of people having the time and knowing the people they can play with. That seems to be the biggest problem these days, is people wanting to try stuff like D&D but not being able to find people around them to do it. Because I mean, obviously, like you said, you got into it because a guy said, hey, I got D&D, and you read it in a car. You got to know people to bring you into the shit, basically, most of the time. Very rarely does somebody just like come along, see D&D on a shelf and say, I don't know anyone that plays it, but hell, I'll try it and see if I can't con some of my friends into playing it.
You're right. It's kind of like a pyramid scheme, but it's the best kind.
Obviously, in this day and age, if somebody is interested in monsters and myth and shit like that, they're not going to have to go very far to find it. Obviously, there's plenty of video games and whatnot that already cover that. So what do you think is going to have to be done to continue appealing to kids these days, since that outlet is kind of filled for most people?
Accessories. Like, I haven't brought miniatures to a convention game, or a con game, if you will, in years. Like, I just don't bring miniatures. This year I brought a bunch of Warhammer, because I ran a Dark Heresy game, but I brought miniatures because I had a whole bunch of old Adeptus Arbites figures, and I brought, because it was an Arbites oriented game. They really help with the battle mat and all that stuff. And I've noticed that, like, the more visual aids and miniatures and stuff that you have and dice, it becomes like this really cool hobby that has gear. Like skateboarding, like talking about trucks and bearings and stuff like that, or any kind of hobby. And sorry, skateboarders, that's a fucking hobby. And it's a hobby sport, but it's a hobby. Like you have different equipment or guns, gun collecting. Like I talk guns with people, like I know what they are. I know the different parts and stuff, so we can talk about them. It has its own jargon, like dice, like 1d6, 2d6, d20, minis, figs, like terrain. And these accessories, this jargon, it also works with other nerddom, like miniature wargaming, because not all miniature wargamers are role players. You can always interconnect all these nerd hobbies and t-shirts. That's the other thing too. It's become like, I don't know if you've seen I've Hit It With My Axe, which is great. It's essentially, and there's even the Vornheim book that just came out detailing the city in which that game takes place in. But it's a bunch of porn stars playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
With Satine Phoenix, and I think she's on that show, but it's really entertaining to watch. And you have all like the new like standard action, and of course the guild. The guild is more like WoW or whatever. Like a lot of people who play MMOs like want to try out role-playing games because it's interesting. So in order to make it more appealing to these people, you have to have accessories and gaming aids and stuff like that. You don't have to, but it's cool. It makes it cool. It makes it interesting. It's kind of like when you get into vinyl, collecting vinyl, right? Sure, you can just buy records, but the records with the gatefold covers and stuff are why, like, those are the ones I kept. Like, those are awesome. It's those kind of things. But moving on, enough babbling about that, but that's how I see it. Like, I think role-playing games will actually gain popularity as they've become very socially acceptable. And I think it'll never be as popular as it was back in the 80s. People need to understand that. It'll never be that popular because digital, being able to carry your books on a tablet, I carry so many books on my playbook, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, I guess some of them are pirated, but I do have the hard copies if that makes anyone feel better. But being on my playbook, they're awesome because I don't have to carry like a bag. Like, I don't know if you've seen those Warhammer books, but they're very heavy. When you have like 15 of them, you're like, fuck that. By the way, big gripe, I am not buying a game book for $60 and then buying the PDF for 30. Fuck that.
No.
That's when I go put on my eye patch and go yar and pirate that fucker. So just saying. But anyway, moving on.
Yeah.
We've been going on for quite a while, so
I don't know if there's anything that we could come up with that really 5th edition shouldn't do, could or couldn't be that we would care about, but it'll be interesting to see how it turns out and what they do, because they seem to be trying to do yet again something different. I don't know if anybody will like it, but I mean, at least some people will appreciate it, I guess.
Well, not to sound like a total hippie, but I've always been kind of a gaming hippie, which is complete polar opposite to what I normally am. But so if a new edition of D&D comes out and it brings more attention to Dungeons and Dragons, and that makes the news or whatever, and brings people into D&D, awesome, because that means for every person playing D&D, that's another person that you could bring into an old Cyberpunk 2020 game or introduce them to Labyrinth Lord and retro gaming. You can do all this cool shit, or Warhammer fantasy roleplay or whatever. You can introduce them to Call of Cthulhu, and it's a good gateway drug. It's the beer of games. Like, you start with the beer, then you're on the pot, and before you know it, you're on the heroin that's Rollmaster. You're like, oh god, I can't stop. Or the hero system.
Too many charts. I've got so many charts.
So many charts. You're stuck in like the chart den, and you go on a chart nod. But yeah, that's the thing, is like, great, good for them. 5th edition. I don't know if I'll get it because I haven't gotten anything 4th edition. Yeah, really. I think I have the player's guide around here somewhere. I just never looked at it.
It's interesting but different. I mean, if you like playing with miniatures and having battle mats and having you do everything as a miniature battle game, basically, with characters, then it's for you. But if you want, I guess, just a tremendous amount of openness and a lot more role-playing, I guess, and going different places and not having miniatures or whatever, then maybe you stick with Pathfinder, which I never really like, because there's something very anime-ish about the style they've chosen for Pathfinder that turns me off.
Really? Like, are you not thinking about Exalted?
No, I'm thinking about, like, the, like, Pathfinder, the hardcover rulebook they released a while back. I don't know, some of it's just kind of like the art style is a little anime for my taste. So
I like the art, but
I don't like the art style. The game is kind of boring for me, so it's not really my bag. I guess if you're really into 3.5, but I don't find the game that interesting at all. So yeah, I'm going to have to give a thumbs down to the Pathfinder, though a thumbs up to Thulu, obviously.
Yeah, Thulu. And the one thing I want to talk about, since I touched on it earlier in the podcast, is I saw what I call a pre-make of The Thing. Have you seen it yet?
No.
No? Well, maybe you should see it and then we should talk about it sometime, because
We can do
I
that.
really want to talk about this movie because I fucking loved the original Thing. So, okay, moving on. So, yeah, next time we'll talk about Caligula.
We will finally talk about the Caligula comics, and then eventually we will get around to talking about
RoboCop.
Hellraiser, RoboCop,
Maybe we should just have a comic book episode.
Hammer, Palladium Games,
Yeah.
Why We Hate Burn Notice, all sorts of topics, and Chronicles of Riddick.
Oh, yeah. I wanted more information to come out.
The next 45 episodes of the MouthFist podcast, we will be covering all of these topics and more.
Poor Ryan. He's got to edit all this shit. Oh.
And make it make sense.
I'm curious to see how this one's going to turn out, Ryan, because there's a lot of it they're not going to hear. Like, you're hearing this right now. That's because hopefully Ryan left it in. But
Yes.
There's whole chunks like where I dropped out and I had to I couldn't figure out, something happened. My Skype crashed and I sat there and, it was this is Ryan's got to do the magic of editing, kids.
This episode was originally 6.5 hours long.
That's true. It's true. And it's the Terrence Malick.
And ended with us staring out our own eyes and being trapped in hell.
It's true. It's like a Terrence Malick meets Clive Barker of podcasts. And so basically it's the thin red Cenobite. And unfortunately for everyone, though, or fortunately, I suppose, the 6.5 hour Fishhook podcast is, I lost my train of thought again.
Yep.
This happens from time to time. I just start talking and I'm like, I don't know what I'm talking about anymore.
And then I have to edit it out.
That's true. So you can leave them in there. I don't care. I'm not embarrassed.
So, any final words in summation?
Well, if you are interested in hearing about the Godicon convention, I will be posting a week later my thoughts. I got the con crud, right? Or as I call it, the confluenza, and it's just been busy with work. I'm posting a bit of Godicon on my site with pictures and blah, blah, blah. So go to Diary of a Grog Nerd, and I also have other stuff that's on there, links to things, blah, blah, blah. So yeah. Next week, I'll probably be talking about my Rogue Trader game. I don't know. So,
and I will not, because I don't do anything.
He does nothing.
I will be editing this podcast for the next week, so by the time we record the next one, I will just be finishing editing this.
Oh, and maybe we can also talk about Valiant Comics. We really should do the next one. Should just be comic books because we have a lot of comic stuff we need to discuss. So,
yes, next episode, comics.
Yes, comics. So, okay, well, I'm Steve Saunders.
And I'm Ryan Speck.
And thanks for listening to the MouthFist podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.